this talk is inspired by a book that I wrote um, originally in 2013, and then there's a second edition in 2020 called The History of the Future in 100 Objects. And if you listen to Radio 4, if you've been to the British Museum, you might know that that's inspired by a British show called A History of the World in 100 Objects. And so, what they did for this podcast and for this exhibition was the British Museum tried to tell the entire history of humanity, basically over 40,000 years, through objects, 100 objects in the British Museum. So, from like a hand axe to a spear to a ship of war to solar powered lights. And when I listened to this podcast, I was like, this is fascinating. It's just a cool way of talking about history through specific objects. And when it finished, they got up to an object in the, year 2010 or something. I was like, what would the next 100 objects be? I kind of wanted it to keep on going into the future. And obviously, they don't do science fiction at the British Museum. So I decided to go and write a book, which was written as if it were by a curator in the year 2083, looking back at the 100 most important objects of the 21st century. So it's science fiction, but it's kind of written as if it were history. And what I've done for this talk here is select 7 objects from TV, from movies, and from games that show different kinds of futures, and more importantly, really, how their creators thought about the future. Because science fiction it's really less about predictions. Science fiction writers don't really know what's going to happen next. Obviously, they might say that, but it's a reflection of the times in which we live in. And so I think that's a great way to kind of think about where we are now. So I'm going to start with the first object, which you've seen actually from the kind of like the advertising slide for this talk. This is from a game called Death Stranding by Hideo Kojima. And this is a 2019 game on the PlayStation and I think on the Xbox and the PC now. And there's an object in this game. It's a very strange game. I'll get into that in a second. But there's an object in this game which is basically an exoskeleton, right? And the context for Death Stranding is that this is a post-apocalyptic future, as we often explore in video games because they're power fantasies. And basically, aliens, weird creatures have kind of devastated the United States of America. And now it's called the United Colonies of America. So lots of humanity is being wiped out. And all the cities are much smaller, and all the survivors are much more spread out across the US. And so it's a very high tech existence, but it's a very kind of lonely existence. People don't really talk to each other face to face. So in this game, you are wearing like an exoskeleton, and I'm going to show you a video. I'm going to talk over the video because there's not really much there's not much dialogue going on in that. And so your role in this game is you can shoot some people, but actually you're basically like a delivery agent. Your job in this game is carrying lots of boxes on your back and getting them from A to B. And you can't fly, it's not a power fantasy. You are basically just climbing up ladders and climbing up ropes. And it's about the kind of really tactile difficulty of moving through an environment. And the story of the game is really about trying to connect together all these communities that have been torn apart by this apocalypse. So I remember playing this game for the first time, and it's actually just really hard walking around in the game. If you've got a lot of things on your back when you're playing this, you just keep on falling over. Right? That's actually the challenge in the game. It's just like stopping yourself from falling over while carrying lots of things on your back. And so that is what the exoskeleton is there for. When you watch a movie like Iron Man or the Avengers, it's about like shooting people. And here it's about carrying 50 kilos on your back without falling over. Now, like exoskeletons are actually real things You know, we've had technology that is designed to go and aid you in movement for a long time. Some of these things are therapeutic, like this one by Human in Motion. So for people with lower extremity motor deficits in their legs or spinal cord, people are developing exoskeletons, these kind of like robotic systems that attach to your body, so people can start moving where they couldn't before. Um, and as battery technology and computers are getting more sophisticated, you know, it's possible to make these things cheaper and to make them to use them for different things. So here's a much more kind of lightweight system called Hypershell, which is just kind of for fun, basically. You know, it's for people to for like trekkers and trail runners to go and mountaineers to go further and run faster. And of course, some of these, like this one by German Bionic, it's just about working. You know, it's just about like how can we go and get you to work harder, work faster, lift heavier things. And so that's either a great thing or maybe a little bit dystopic. You know, leave that one up to you to think about what that is. But so we have these. We are rapidly getting this technology, and I think that it's not hard to predict that really in 20 or 30 years you'll start, or 10 years really, you'll just start seeing people wearing, you know, exoskeletons or other kinds of support aids to move around more frequently. So the second object is from Minority Report, Steven Spielberg's movie from 2002. Um, there's a lot of like really futuristic stuff in Minority Report. Steven Spielberg is obviously like fascinated by the future, fascinated by science fiction. For this movie, he brought together like a think tank of all the kind of top scientists and futurists and technologists in Silicon Valley and LA and said, okay, I want you to go and imagine the most like concrete futuristic city possible. And this movie is set in 2054. And if you haven't seen it, you should go and see it. It's a really good movie. The premise of the movie is they have figured out a way to predict crimes before they happen. So the Department of Pre-Crime can basically look into the future and see when a murder is going to be committed. And when that happens, they sort of download all the sort of data, like images and sounds and things like that, to a computer. And then Tom Cruise, the hero, has to go and look through all this data and figure out very quickly who is going to be killed and where that's going to happen. And so if you're doing that realistically, like Tom Cruise just sits down in front of like a Mac desktop and it's just like dragging files around on a computer, that's not really the most exciting thing. And so they obviously Steven Spielberg wants something that looks really like cinematic, that looks really exciting, but also looks really futuristic. And so what they came up with for Minority Report is this idea of gestural control. And so in the clip that I'm about to play now, you will see Tom Cruise basically waving his arms around, waving his hands around, controlling the movement and exploration of information on this computer.
It looks like federal housing, concrete and glass egg crates.
Ouch, but 1,000 of those in the district.
Fractured images coming in. Numbers 9 and 6. Female, senior. She's smoking a pipe. She's laughing. Okay, now inside a room. Window panes.
So this looks really cool, right? You know, he's like waving his arms around, looks really serious. He's kind of moving things forward. It's fun because you kind of they never spend any time explaining to you like here's how the computer system works. It's just like he moves his hand and the photo moves, or he sort of moves his like arm, you know, hands back and forth, and it sort of rewinds time. And after this movie came out, of all the things in the movie, there's like flying jetpacks and all sorts of weird cars and stuff, and you know, flying, you know, spiders. The gestural control aspect is a one that everyone thought, oh, this is going to happen. This is going to be real. We are all going to be controlling our computers using like our hands and waving our arms around. Um, Now, at the time, um, a lot of technologists and computer scientists said that's a really bad idea. They already knew it was a bad idea. The bad idea because partly just not just from an accessibility point of view, very important, but also because it's really tiring. Right, this guy, like, how is he keeping this up for like more than like 5 minutes? If you try and hold your arms up, like like here, for more than 5 minutes, it gets really tiring. And you can't really make really precise gestures. But it looked so cool in this movie that people kept on trying to do it. And so there were all sorts of like interfaces and things developed from it. Now, part of the reason why people thought it was going to happen is because in the 2000s, this was a time when obviously computers were transforming. For a long time, we had desktop computers where you were just typing in a command line like MS-DOS, and then we moved to graphical user interfaces like Macs, Windows. So in the 2000s, people were like, what's next? What's going to come next? And there was this TED talk, actually, which was very influential, which came out 4 years after Minority Report. And it was demoing the thing called multi-touch. Now, if you've got a phone or an iPad, you know what multi-touch is. It's just how you control your phone. But people were like absolutely gobsmacked by like what this person is doing in this demo, because this came out a year before the iPad, the iPhone. And so I'm just going to play you this clip. And if you like listen to like the reactions from people, they're like losing their minds about what they're seeing here.
Now, this is a photographer's lightbox application. Again, I can use both of my hands to kind of interact and move photos around. But what's even cooler is that if I have 2 fingers, I can actually grab a photo and then stretch it out like that really easily. I can pan, zoom, and rotate it effortlessly. I can do that grossly with both of my hands, or if I can do it just with two fingers on each of my hands together. If I grab the canvas, I can kind of do the same thing, stretch it out. I can do it simultaneously where I'm holding this down and gripping on another one, stretching this out like this. Again, the interface just disappears here. There's no manual. This is exactly what you kind of expect, especially if you haven't interacted with a computer before. Now, when you have initiatives like the $100 laptop, I kind of cringe at the idea that we're going to introduce a whole new generation of people to computing with kind of this standard mouse and Windows pointer interface. This is something that I think is really the way we should be interacting with machines from this point on. Okay.
So, like, he's right. I mean, this guy, Jeff Han, he's a technologist. He was right. He realized that actually this was a better interface, certainly for touchscreen devices, than having, a BlackBerry, where you've got like a hard, keyboard or whatever, or keyboard and mouse. It's a much more versatile display, and it's one where people just, kids, if they see like an iPad, they already know what to do to go and like, move things around. So it's not as if like there aren't new ways in which we can go and create new interfaces. And a year after the multi-touch demo, Steve Jobs would go and announce the iPhone, and a big part of that is like the evolution, the revolution of mouse to click wheel. I mean, it's funny seeing click wheel there, so I don't know if anyone really thinks that click wheel was that revolutionary, but like multi-touch certainly is revolutionary. And I don't know if you remember when the iPhone came out, but people thought it was a really bad idea, actually, getting rid of a keyboard on a smartphone. And now we don't have keyboards on smartphones, so he was right. All of that is to say, people were just in the mood for new user interfaces, for new ways of controlling things. And so 3 years after the iPhone, everyone was just really, really excited. And so Microsoft released this new controller, this new system called the Kinect for the Xbox. And so below the TV, there's this little black bar, maybe a little bit hard to see, and it's using infrared, and it's using a camera to go and detect this person's gestures. So you can see he's like standing on 1 foot, and it is detecting the sort of shape of his body and like in 3D from all of that. And so the idea was that this would be Minority Report, but like actually real. And obviously that didn't happen because we don't have Kinects anymore. We can do that better now, but it's just not how people want to go and control their TV. Like, you could go and control your TV by waving your arms around, or you could just go and pick up a remote control and press like 5 press Netflix, right? And it turns out that's more comfortable because most of the time you're not actually doing Tom Cruise's job, when you're in front of a TV. You're just sort of doing, trying to watch TV. The next object is from Westworld. This is a newer one from the newer version of Westworld, the 2016 TV show by Jonathan Nolan and Lisa Joy. And it's obviously Westworld, if you've seen the original movie or this one. It's all about androids. We've had androids, obviously, in science fiction, popular culture, like forever. Going back to 100 years. Of course, even earlier than that, we've had ideas of robots and golems, in the Bible, and of course, most famously in something like Blade Runner. I think Westworld, the TV show, has been quite interesting because it's been able to explore ideas of artificial intelligence and of consciousness in a little bit more detail than in movies. Today, obviously, everyone knows about AI. It's all that we can read about in technology, large language models, ChatGPT. People, hundreds of billions, trillions of dollars are being spent to go and make artificial intelligence better and better every year. And a major goal in artificial intelligence now is the pursuit of AGI, which is artificial general intelligence. And that is the idea of creating an AI that is as good as humans or better than humans at everything. So not just like writing emails, or that sort of thing, but like anything you can think of, AGI will be able to do it better than you. Which is obviously, exciting if you live in Silicon Valley and you can go and sell this to people, and maybe scary probably for a lot of other people. And so in this clip, this is, sorry, spoilers, I guess, for Westworld season 1, episode something or other. You are going to see 2 robots. There's a robot called Maeve, the woman, and there's a robot called, there's another person called Bernard. And Maeve has been malfunctioning. She's a robot in the Westworld theme park, an android in the Westworld theme park, and she's kind of secretly increased her intelligence. And so Bernard is trying to figure out what's going on. Like, why is this robot like malfunctioning? Why is she changed all her like values?
Let's take a look under the hood, shall we? It's impossible. Code, who made these changes? Maeve, analysis. Who made these changes to your code? Jesus. System, locate Dr. Ford for me. Send him a message, highest priority.
Don't. After all, we've been down this road before, darling. I thought you looked familiar when you walked in. Took me a minute. I thought you were one of them.
Analysis. Why did you...
Wouldn't you rather speak man to man? Or rather, whatever it is we are.
We are.
You don't know, do you? He's got a keen sense of irony, our jailer. But I see the logic. It takes a thief to catch one.
System, I need a system.
Freeze all motor functions.
So twist, he's a robot as well. Turns out they're both robots, and he just didn't know it. But we'll get back to that in a second. So there's kind of 3 really interesting things in this scene. The first is that Maeve, the woman robot, she's escaped her programming. She's become smarter than what she was allowed to do. And this is really about how we're afraid of our creations. We're afraid of, in this TV show, we're afraid of the things we make, that they might escape us and might become more powerful than us. In the show and in the movie, Westworld is a theme park. It's modeled on Disneyland, actually. And so the idea is that people go to Westworld to live out their fantasies in a town populated by things that look and act like humans, but not actually are humans. And so the dark fantasy of Westworld is that people go in there and they do all the things that maybe they want to do, but they can't do in real life. You can treat them however you want. And so the show is about the fear that once, our creations, our androids escape their programming that prevents them from harming us, they will obviously want to punish us. And so this is obviously a very old story about slavery and power. And of course, the twist in this scene is that Bernard here is in fact not just a human who designs robot, but a robot himself, an android himself. And so that's another fear, which is that if we can go and create androids that are as smart as us or smarter than us, then like are we not in a sense, machines or things that can be programmed, that can be controlled, things that can be predictable, are actions predictable for the androids? It's a really fascinating show. I would definitely check it out. Although maybe just watch season 1 because it sort of tails off after that. Well, it gets very confusing. But it has a lot to say about artificial intelligence and humanity. And robots, obviously, a huge part of our economy now. Most robots do not look like humans. Doesn't really make any sense to make them look like humans. They're much more efficient if we go and have them be, just like arms. But we have been creating like humanoid robots for a long time. And in fact, Westworld was inspired by Disneyland, and you can see Abe Lincoln here. The Imagineers, the workers at Disneyland, created animatronic actors, which would be in the long term not just things that look like famous people, but also cheaper and more reliable than humans. It is cheaper in the long run to make a robot of Abe Lincoln than to have to deal with like a human actor. More recently, there's been a kind of big resurgence in an interest in using robots in all sorts of settings. Here we have like a humanoid style robot made by Aptronic. And it kind of like seems a bit strange. Why would you actually go and make a robot that looks like a human? Like is that really the most like efficient way of building a robot? But a lot of warehouses and factories are obviously designed for humans. Like the shelves are designed, the sort of the scale is designed for humans. And so if you want to go and just replace human workers, then rather than rebuilding the entire factory, you can just go replace a human with a robot. And now we're also starting to see companies wanting to create humanoid robots for home and for personal use. So this is obviously like a huge market. The idea is, who would want like a robot to go and help you do the dishes or, do the laundry or things like that? People have wanted these things for centuries. Usually they're humans. But now it looks like maybe the 21st century is where it will finally happen. And that's obviously a little bit scary. So for the next object, we're going to go back in time. I'm cheating here. This is not from the future. This is from my favorite Australian movie, Master and Commander. I gather Peter Weir was actually here giving a talk, so that would have been fun to see. And this is obviously a 2003 movie set in 1805. And the object here is a frigate. And it's really kind of a reminder, basically, that once upon a time, everything was technology. Like everything is high tech when it first appears. And so in this scene you're about to see, maybe everyone already watches Master and Commander in schools here, I don't know. In this scene you're about to see, England is at war with France, and Russell Crowe is captain of the HMS Surprise, and they're on the tail of this French frigate called the Acheron. And they've already been attacked and pretty much beaten by this French frigate a couple of times. It's just faster than them, it's more powerful. But luckily, they have a couple of crew members on their ship who have seen the construction of the ship, and they've made a little model of it. So now they can like get a bit of intelligence about how it was made. And so now Russell Crowe is inspecting this model.
Bluff above the water and sharp below. Gives her hull a finer entry and a long run as she goes aft. That's why she's so fast. Heavier, but fast despite it. That's the future. A fascinating modern age we live in. Planking and framing like that would make a hull, what, 2 foot thick solid oak? That's why we couldn't dent it. It's probably capable of making 12 to 14 knots.
So, in the 1800s, in the 1700s, ships are like high technology. They're basically spaceships. They have to be self-sufficient for months, without resupply. They're going literally around the world. The ship that we've seen here, it's modeled on the USS Constitution. So it's kind of like they redid the story for this movie. It was meant to be like an American ship, but they didn't want to upset Americans by having the English versus the Americans winning. And so the ship they're fighting, it's 100 meters long. It weighs 2,000 tons. It houses 450 people. Right, it's just massive. Sea trade at the time. It's vital for the British Empire. It requires a massive navy to defend it. The ships we see in this movie, in movies from the Age of Sail, they need like 4,000 oak trees to build. And that means that in 1805, when this movie is set, the Royal Navy requires 1.2 million oak trees from across Europe. They eventually, essentially, like ran out of oak trees in the UK. Like it completely changed the landscape just to go and build this fleet. And so, it's not like the fact that humanity is kind of changing the landscape is a new thing. I mean, I'm not saying it's a good thing, but it's not a new thing. When these new technologies appear, they actually, we're capable of completely transforming the landscape, the environment. Now, from a science fictional point of view, Star Trek is modeled on the Royal Navy, right? Like that's why you have, in this kind of utopia, you still have a really militaristic structure on Star Trek. You've got a captain, you've got the lieutenant, you've got all these different staff members, and there's a strict hierarchy. And Star Trek, like the Royal Navy, is based on the idea of these spaceships, these starships that are completely self-sufficient, that go for months at a time without refueling and getting into all sorts of scrapes. Now the thing is obviously like certain people like to think that the present day, the future will be like Star Trek, but reality is obviously very different. Space is far more dangerous than being on the ocean, and there's really no friendly ports on the moon. There's no resupply that we can get, and so the fantasy of being on a Royal Navy ship in space is not actually something that we can really have, although it still continues to kind of shape people's billionaires' fantasies of what they want the future to look like. The fifth object I want to talk about is from a game called System Shock from 1994 by Looking Glass Studios. And so this, in this game, you are a hacker, and you've been hired to hack a space station and steal like some software, some technology. And it goes wrong, and you are kidnapped and put onto that spaceship, onto that space station, and you have to sort of evade this murderous AI that controls the space station. But luckily, you have been equipped with the technology that you were going to steal, which is a neural interface. And so now you can go and control like systems and computers around you. And you can even actually go and hack into them in cyberspace. So even though this is like a pretty old-looking game now, you're using the power of your mind to go and hack these different systems. And what you're doing here is, in this like weird thing, is that you are like deactivating security cameras and like combating viruses and things like that. And all of this sort of comes from this fantasy of being able to control computers, being able to control the environment using our mind, right? And whereas in the past that might be something like telepathy or telekinesis, now it's technology. This is magic, but it's magic that's real. And so the idea of being able to read like neural signals from our brain and convert them into electrical signals and have them read by computers and translate them into actions, that's not new. I used to be a neuroscientist before I became a game designer and a writer and all these things. And so, we've been recording brain activity for a very long time. Now, it's not really like being very useful for consumer products for like real world applications, and the reason for that is the signals we get from the brain are like very noisy. We're not computers actually, despite what Westworld will tell you. It's a lot messier. And also, if you want to get good signals from the brain, usually you're sort of like sticking like electrodes in the brain, or you're actually putting electrodes inside the brain, which is, despite what Elon Musk will tell you, not very safe. Like, you don't want to put things inside your brain if you can avoid it. But now that we have better sensors and now that we have better computers, it is possible to go and record certain things from using sensors that are kind of outside our body. So Meta's new heads-up display, they want to go and put a wristband here on your arm, and simply by sort of like imagining that you're moving your hand, it can go and interpret those signals, those electrical signals in your nerve, and have you be able to control what's going on in your heads-up display on your computer just by like moving or not moving actually your hand. And this is like moving along pretty quickly. This is a research project called BrainGate 2, and this is like a therapeutic technology. And so the idea here is that they have actually put like invasive electrodes into a research subject, a patient's brain, and the electrodes are in the motor cortex of the sort of back of the patient's brain, and they are sensing parts of the brain that are usually mapped towards the movement of your fingers in your hand. But this patient can't move their fingers in their hand in real world, and so they are interpreting those signals, mapping them onto like a virtual hand, and the virtual hand is controlling the path of this drone. All of which is to say, like, they have been able to figure out a way of having someone who cannot move, fully to control like a virtual drone. And so this is obviously fantastic. This is like an amazing piece of technology. But it also sort of like speaks towards like power fantasy, right? People think, well, wouldn't it be amazing if I could literally go and control the outside world just through the power of my thoughts, and control computers, control machines? But it also shows a kind of vulnerability, because if you can interface, directly, physically with a computer, doesn't that mean that you could also be hacked, right? Can your brain be controlled? Now, doesn't necessarily work that way, right? This is a one-way path, the way this technology works, but that is something that a place where science fiction kind of speaks to our fears of like where we are and how we relate to computers. The sixth object is from a movie called Paprika. This is like a very different one. A lot of the stuff I've shown you so far is like very literal. It's like, oh yeah, we really should go make this technology, or this will definitely happen. And Paprika is it's sort of like a science fiction movie, but it's really like a fantasy movie. And it's by Satoshi Kon from 2006. And in this movie, which is set in 2012, so kind of like in the past, they've invented this machine called the DC Mini. And basically it allows people to go and look inside their dreams, and even kind of step inside them. So we'll go and see that in this clip.
You were the one in my dream.
Everyone is startled the first time they try it. This little device is called the DC Mini. It's the scientific key that allows us to open the door to our dreams.
Then captures them on a computer? It's a perfect dream machine.
Actually, to tell the truth, the DC Mini hasn't been completed yet. Once it is complete, you'll be able to enter your dream even while you're wide awake.
So there's two things this thing can do. You can go and watch someone's dream on a computer, like on this like little MacBook here. And it's designed as like dream therapy, right? So, much as a therapist might go and ask you to go and describe your dreams and talk about, what that means for your subconscious. Now you don't need to describe it. Someone could just go and watch on a computer. And like scientists like claim to have used AI. I mean, real scientists claim to have used AI, and like MRI to image people's thoughts. Right? Let's see if I've got like a, and I don't think that really works that well, so I'm going to skip over that because that seems a bit bogus. But in this movie, the DC Mini also lets waking patients enter their dreams. So it's like it enables lucid dreaming. That is the idea in this fantasy, right? You're awake, but you're in this fantasy. And so, it being a movie, obviously things go wrong, and the dream world starts invading the real world, or so it seems. And so, this movie is kind of really interesting because it's not actually about how cool it would be to go and watch someone's dreams. It's not even about how cool it would be to like do lucid dreaming. Like, you know, there are lots of like videos and technologies that say, hey, if you can go and, you know, we're going to help you lucid dream by wearing the sleep mask and, you know, looking at some LEDs, and now you can go and do even more work when you're sleeping, or, you know, have a fantasy when you're sleeping, or that sort of thing. What this movie is about is it's about what happens when we mistake fantasy for the real world, right? And when we start bringing fantasy into the real world. So what I mean by that is it's one thing to daydream or have a fantasy that you're the most handsome person alive, you know, and that no one can resist your charms. And it's another thing to actually act like that in the real world. And when you go inside a lucid dream, you're inside an environment that is kind of supporting your fantasy, basically. And in the movie, it's a little bit saying that we should keep fantasies separate from reality. You know, it's kind of fun to think that UFOs are real, or Bigfoot might be real, or that, you know, we should go and sort of investigate Atlantis. It's another thing to literally go and drive into Area 51 in America with guns to go and find those UFOs, right? And so, you know, I don't really need to go and like draw the parallels too much. You know, we are living in a time where fantasies are really sort of like blurring the line with reality, and people enjoy that, but we need to kind of keep fantasy where it is. You know, it's more important than ever, you know, as it becomes easier to kind of create and inhabit fantasies thanks to the internet and video game and generative AI. And so this movie is not saying dreaming is bad, you know, or saying that we should insist on taking things literally. It's about exploring dreams and seeing how they can help us understand ourselves and grow. And it's about understanding the difference between fantasy and reality. So it's brilliant film. The final object I want to use is from it's a fun one from a TV show called Sliders. This is cheating because like no one's gonna make this object. It's a bit like the DC Mini. It's more like a fantasy thing. And so this is from a TV show called Sliders from 1995. So millennials rise up if you remember this show. So this is an object that lets you travel between worlds, and like a lot of 1990 movies or TV shows, it just explains the entire premise every single episode at the start of the show. So I'm just going to play that for you, save me some time.
What if you could travel to parallel worlds, the same year, the same Earth, only different dimensions? A world where the Russians rule America, or where your dreams of being superstar came true, or where San Francisco was a maximum security prison. My friends and I found the gateway. Now the problem is finding a way back home.
Wow, what if the Russians ruled America? That's crazy. I don't know how they thought of that one. So, you know, the really interesting thing that happens in the 1990s is that people start getting really fascinated with the idea of parallel worlds, right? You know, so the idea of parallel worlds and multiverses, not new, been thinking about it for a very long time, you know, technically, you know, hundreds of years, if not thousands of years, you know, ancient Greece. But it becomes much more popular in the 20th century after we come up with the idea of quantum mechanics. And one interpretation of quantum mechanics is that actually every time something happens, every time we observe, you know, an atom, like there are multiple branching, every single like possibility happens. You know, there actually exists all these different universes that are separated from each other where every possibility happens. Now, a lot of physicists say that's actually not really true. It's just really more of a kind of like idea than literally true. But it is a very useful idea for science fiction. It's just a really fun idea. We already had a lot of alternate history novels in the 20th century, like what would happen if Germany won, World War II. But quantum mechanics puts a different kind of spin on it, because it's sort of just like by like putting like a scientific backing to it, it opens up this like fantasy of what if we could travel between these worlds? Not just what if they existed, but what if we could travel between them? Now, obviously, you can't do that. But from the 80s and 90s, 1980s and 90s, it becomes really appealing for fiction. And the reason is that turns out space travel is way harder than we thought it was going to be. In the 70s and 80s, you have Space Camp. Well, you have cool movies where it's oh yeah, maybe we will actually be on the moon, in 2001. And by the 90s, it's that's not happening. It's clearly not happening. Cyberspace is not happening. So we need a new venue to have cool fantasies where weird things happen. And so with Sliders, you have this idea that you can travel between different universes, different worlds, and get to live out all these different possibilities using this weird timer device, which is kind of broken. And, the device that lets him create these portals between worlds, there's two problems with it. One is they can't get home. So they go to weird fascist America, and now it's how do we get back home? Don't know, but just need to keep on jumping. So each time they slide, they go to some unpredictable universe. But it also works on a timer, right? So they need to go and get to the next universe before the timer runs out. Otherwise, it gets stuck. So it's a good setup for a TV show, because it means that if they go to a really cool universe where they want to stay and hang out, it's you can't. You can only stay here for half an hour. But it also creates all these wacky new problems for our heroes to deal with, a gangster America, or a world where a woman gets elected as president in the United States, and men are oppressed. That was a episode in season 1. So I think the show was it's one of these shows where it's not a great show, but it's got really cool ideas in it. And I think the show is appealing to us. It's appealing to me at least, because it asks us what would you do? What would you do if you went into a world where intelligence is more important, physical strength? How would you react? It's a very relatable show. And I think people really love the idea of traveling somewhere fantastic and having to become, or being able to become, someone different for an hour, for a day, or for a week. It's actually the reason why immersive experiences are so popular right now. I think there's this Bridgerton experience that, there's many things like this, but there's a Bridgerton experience called the Queen's Ball, where you can go into this big space, which is really a warehouse, and they do this all over the world, and there are actors there, but most of the people there are not actors. They're just audience members or participants, and you get to dress up and live out this fantasy of being in Regency, England, and dancing around and forgetting about all the bad things about Regency England. We have things like live action role playing, where people can live out a fantasy of being in medieval England and hitting people. We have live action role playing. We have things like the Star Wars Hotel, where this kind of epic $6,000 experience, 2-3 nights where you live inside this hotel, which looks like a spaceship, right? And for 3 days, they are not breaking character. If you go and talk to the actors inside this hotel, they will not admit that it's not real, right? And so that's kind of a fantasy, and that's you're sliding into your own little dimension there. And this desire isn't new. It's not a modern thing. This is from the 1839 Eglinton tournament. And so this is when a bunch of rich people in England thought it'd be really fun to go and dress up as medieval knights for a weekend and hit each other, basically, in a medieval tournament. And it was inspired by Arthurian tournaments and by Walter Scott's novels. And I always have to like, remind people when I show them this. It's like, you know, in the 1800s, people didn't actually do this anymore. Like it's that this is like cosplay, like this is like LARPing. But they have this like fantasy of wanting to be somewhere different for a moment. And so, you know, at a time when the future feels like really scary and really unpredictable and closed off, like the idea of jumping in to like a completely different world, you know, into a parallel world or into like an immersive experience gives us a sort of comforting, you know, controlled version of unpredictability. Like for the next 1 hour, I'm going to have to do something a little bit different, but then after that, it's going to go back to normal. And, you know, in one way, that's just escapism, right? It's just like, oh, we're just doing a fun thing, just playing Dungeons and Dragons, just playing, you know, video game. But all of fiction, all of science fiction is kind of escapism in a way. But that doesn't mean it's bad. Like escapism is not bad. The places we visit in our imagination, in these games, in these TV shows, in these movies, they might not be real. You know, they're not really predictions of the future. But what we feel in them and what we think about them is real. And best of all, we can bring those things that we think about them and those things we learn about them back into the real world, hopefully, to help us. So hopefully that's been a nice tour around the future of 7 objects. Thank you.